Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. In today's show, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Deeks. Rob is the CEO of Together as One, which is a youth-led charity bringing communities together as one through training, youth work and creative projects. Based in Slough, Together as One was previously known as, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Ek Saath, which means together as one in Hindi, Punjabi and Urdu. The project was established in response to gang violence between young people, formation backgrounds in Slough. Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories, Rob.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you for having us.
No, it's great to have you on. Looking forward to our chat, and a little shout out and thank you to Jamie Hassan for putting us in touch with each other.
Yeah, brilliant. Jamie's actually one of the trustees for our charity, and he's been such a massive support for our organisation over most of the last 20 years. So it was no surprise when another opportunity presented itself and that Jamie had been behind it, because he's such an incredible advocate for our work.
Oh, that's great. Brilliant. Okay, so just before we talk about Together as One, please can you tell us a bit about yourself, your life's journey and how you became involved with the charity, please, Rob?
Yes, certainly. So I grew up in Bromsgrove, which is a town on the edge of Birmingham. There's quite a few different things that would probably characterise Bromsgrove, but diversity isn't one of them. It's like a very kind of white British area. I had a happy childhood there growing up, but I think one of the things that I really struggled with was to really know what I wanted to do with my life. I was, I wasn't academically very gifted, and I found it quite hard to focus at school because I just couldn't really understand what the future held for me or see myself in any particular role. But I think one of the things that was really important to me was my values. Stepdad came into my life when I was around 12, 13, but up until then I was raised by my mom, who really taught me growing up to try, wherever possible, not to be prejudiced against other people, to resolve your conflicts without violence and things like that. So I spent a lot of my formative years, in school, kind of being a bit of a peacemaker and trying to resolve conflict. And if I felt someone was being judged unfairly because of their ethnicity or their faith or something like that, I would try and challenge it. But I never ever thought that, you could have like a role in the world around that. And then one day I was sitting in the in the common room of the sixth form where I was failing my A-levels. And I just saw a poster on the wall for the University of Bradford's Peace Studies Department. And I forget the exact wording of the poster, but it was essentially saying that, conflict, violence isn't inevitable, and you can do positive things to try to prevent it. So suddenly I thought, wow, this thing that I just do because I think it's the right thing could actually be a career. So I applied to Bradford, and as I say, because I hadn't been doing very well at school, I was amazed when they let me in because my grades fell far short. But they must have seen something, thank heavens, because I went there and I graduated with the highest mark in my year, which I think I only mention really because it just illustrates how I went from being really quite lost to just finding something that I was passionate about. So. After I graduated from Bradford in Peace Studies, I did a Master's in Violence, Conflict and Development at SOAS in London. And then after then, I found myself at another juncture, really. And throughout my time, while I was studying, I'd always done bar work, worked in hotels. And, without really knowing how to progress to the next stage in my career, I kind of regressed to pulling pints. But my mom, who has always been a driving force in my life, I think she was getting frustrated. So she started cutting adverts out of the Society Guardian on a Wednesday,
Yeah.
and just leaving them all around the house. And I always remember finding this one for this charity with an unusual name, Ixart, on the stairs in a place called Slough, which at the time I honestly couldn't have told you where it was. These days, people say I could work at the Slough Tourist Board because I talked the place up so much. But at the time, I had no idea where it even was. But I applied, and I came down to Slough for the day to do an interview, and I was fortunate enough to get the job. And that was 20 years ago. So I've been here ever since. And that's really how the story of how I came to be here.
That's an amazing story, Rob. I mean, I guess the people at the university must have seen the authenticity and the fact that you had these values, and you actually. I think it's great how you've been able to use those values as you've grown up, get a career, and have a life around that. I think that's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I think one of the things that was, quite special about how I got here and how this ended up was I was always always interested in other cultures as well, and I think perhaps that was part of growing up in Bromsgrove, where we weren't really exposed to people from that many different backgrounds. And I think when I graduated from the master's degree, and I could see that a lot of the people that I studied with were going to places all over the world. Initially I felt a little bit like I was missing out, but one of the amazing things about Slough is that you're exposed to so many different cultures, so many different faiths, and that's been a really enriching experience as well.
I bet it has. Well, I was brought up in Windsor, which was next door to Slough, and we always spoke about the Betjeman poem, "Come friendly bombs fall on Slough." But I think that was down to the trading estate at the time.
Yeah, I mean that poem has, I think to some extent it's haunted the town and given it a certain level of infamy. But I think that has also perhaps not for the right reasons, but put it on the map. There's always great debates over the true size of Slough's population, because it's quite a transitory population. So a lot of the traditional methods of measuring a population don't quite work here. But for a town that let's say it's got 150,000 people in it, people all over the UK know Slough. They've heard of it, even if they've never been here. And there's a lot of towns of a commensurate size that people have barely heard of. So
yeah,
it's not always for the right reasons, but there's plenty of people that have heard of Slough.
You've been with the charity for 20 years. How long's the charity been going, and how and why did it start, Rob?
So Ixart was established in 1998 because of violence within our Asian community in Slough. The tensions were between two rival groups, one called the Chalvi Boys, which was predominantly a group of young people from Pakistani backgrounds in Chalvi, and a group called Sher Punjab, which literally means Lions of the Punjab. And that was a predominantly Sikh group, also Hindus within that group. And though there was factions that were from Slough, it was a group that was mainly based in Southall. And back then, there was, really violent tensions between these groups. Shops were burnt. One young person had his hand chopped off in a riot. A quick thinking WPC put the hand in an ice cream fridge in one of the shops, and they managed to sew that back on. But it just speaks to the level of violence that was going on between young people from these communities back then. It's interesting because I think now it's almost common sense to us, in 2023, that we should involve young people in the solutions to the tensions. But back then it was considered quite groundbreaking in the sense that whenever something like this, whenever tensions were in communities, it was always very much left to talking to older people to to resolve the conflict. Community leaders
Yeah.
were left to resolve them, whereas back then the decision makers at the time said, what we need to do is really empower young people around this.
Who were the people that decided to go and start this initiative?
Well, one of the key individuals was Dr. Dudley Weeks. To rewind a little bit, the tensions really got a lot of media attention, and I think in part because society was kind of used to seeing tensions that were between white people and minority communities, but to actually have a really high-profile violent tension within and between minority communities was considered, really quite different. Channel 4 picked up on these tensions and decided to make a documentary about them. And I think it was almost in a slightly tongue-in-cheek kind of way. They got this American peacemaker who'd got experience in Sudan and Somalia and Sierra Leone, and dropped him off in Slough with a film crew. And he had he had some success at mediating the tensions between the
Yeah.
gang leaders, but really it was him that said, everywhere that I've practiced all over the world, the real lasting change has come when we've empowered local communities rather than ironically relied on people like himself.
So these would be involving the people within the gangs themselves, would it?
Yeah, or even just people from within the communities who are
Yeah.
willing to say, you know what, this isn't right, and we're going to do something about it.
So fast forwarding to today, and thank you for that little history lesson there. That was very interesting. What do you do in terms of how do you first become aware of tensions?
Well, it a lot of the time, because we work in so many different environments, one of the ways that we become aware is when a school or a local authority or the police, often they're the first people to pick up on something and say, "Hang on, we've got an issue here," and that's when our phone rings, and
Yeah.
that's when an initial meeting is set up to say, what can we do to address these tensions?
Can you give us an example of the type of tension that you would be made aware of, please, Rob?
There's been so many over the years, Bob, and so many different kinds of. One of the things that would probably surprise a lot of your listeners is that a lot of the time tensions is within communities. So, a lot of the time, you might think to yourself, well, the tensions are going to be between, black and white young people. But actually, in one school, it can be between young people from Somali and Jamaican backgrounds, and another school between Polish and white British, and another school between Muslim and Sikh. And what's interesting is when you take a step back, you could say, well, actually, that's conflict, within a black communities, within white communities, within Asian communities. And then even further, even more sectarian, you can have a situation where, within the same school, two rival factions of young Sikhs can fall out. So, tension can take all forms, really. And sometimes as well, I've just outlined some that are very much identity based, but
Yes.
a lot of the time, issues can arise involving youth violence where actually ethnicity isn't an issue. It's based on, a gang identity that transcends ethnicity or faith. And in an ironic way, a lot of our gangs can be very inclusive because they don't necessarily care whether a young person, worships one god or another, or where their family heritage is. If they're established around criminal exploitation, all they cared about is whether the young person is disaffected enough to get involved in that exploitation.
Yeah. So there's loads of different reasons for this conflict to arise, and then you're made aware of it. What happens next?
I think often the temptation is to rush in somewhere, but I think one of the things that I think I've learned over time is is to swap round that old adage of don't just stand there, do something. Sometimes it's best to not just do something but stand there for a moment and really survey what's going on, because it's really important to listen to the young people involved and find out what's going on, because so often we rush to find solutions before we actually fully understand what's happening, and that can be really dangerous. So,
Yeah.
trying to understand what's happening, try to unpick the narratives, and try to understand the roots of where tensions have come from.
And you have a team. You have a team of people within the charity who do this, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I feel so blessed by is because we've been operating for such a good deal of time now. Most of the staff team used to be young people on the project, so they're young people who've previously given their time, volunteered, been a part of our programs, and now they actually give their time and as employees rather than volunteers.
Yes.
And that means that we're very locally embedded. It means that our staff team is really reflective of the community and very diverse. The people involved, they've got at least two of them have had loved ones that they've lost to knife crime. And so they really have that deep and powerful motivation to make a difference.
Yeah. And I guess one of the first things you need to do is to sort of gain the trust of the young people that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, Bob, because one of the things is that, and I get this off a lot of people, is that, and I don't know what it is, but a lot of people think I'm a policeman. So,
Oh, what you mean, the people that you talk to?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, even more widely. I live in the Britwell area of Slough, and I, I guess over time I've found a place that I enjoy going back to. But for the longest time, I didn't feel any particular affinity to any special single place getting my haircut. So I used to go to different places, but I always found it a way of being very embedded in the community, because those conversations in the hairdressers, you really understand what's going on in your local area.
Yes.
And I went in one place in Britwell near where I live, and I was next in turn to get my hair cut, and he turned around to me and said, "Are you a Fed?" And I was shocked, because I thought even if I was police, I'd still need to get my hair cut. But there was a young person actually who I'd been talking to in the hairdressers, and he said, "Oh no, he's a youth worker. He's helped me out. He's not police."
Yeah.
But it just gives you an example of how, even though at times I think that I've, become fully embedded in this community, there's still a lot of people, via appearance or whatever, that would not necessarily trust me initially.
Yeah.
But again, one of the good things about, staying in this role for, a long enough time is that you build up this cachet of trust. And thankfully, across there's communities that we've been working with for so long now that, often a young person that we start engaging with, they'll say, my older cousin told me about you, or my older brother used to come to you. And because of that, you have a certain level of trust within communities. I think also as well, even doing proactive work around cohesion, a lot of our communities, there are kind of a lot of fly-by-night initiatives that come in, promise the world, and then move on. And I guess we're the antithesis of this, because we're always here, and because of that, we do have a lot of support from the wider community.
Yeah. So the trust is already, because you're so embedded in the community, the trust is already there. And I guess the very fact that you are in business, shall we say, although you're a charity, this is ongoing. I mean, you've never got to the point where you thought, well, actually, we've sorted this out in Slough. Everybody's happy. They all love each other. It's continuous. I mean, how would you say things have evolved since over the last 20 years? I mean, are things better, worse, or about the same?
you hit on a really good point there, Bob, about how we've developed and how the community's developed and how things have changed. I think one of the things that we try to do is to proactively support young people who are vulnerable to getting involved with problems. And because of that, our work has developed to do a lot of work around cohesion and bringing people together that is proactive and not waiting for tensions to develop, so that actually we can be a cohesive town and not wait for problems to arise. A good example of that would be our oral history work, our heritage work, where from time to time we've delivered projects where we've trained up young people to be kind of historians for the community and to interview community members about their lives. One of the first projects we did on that was about ex-Indian servicemen who'd fought for Britain during the Second World War, because it was a section of Slough's community that felt like they'd never had their stories heard. And crucially for us, it was a history that brought together people from Indian and Pakistani backgrounds, because, of course, when the Second World War started, British India and Pakistan were still the same country. So British forces that took volunteers from South Asia, it was one unified continent. So there was Indian and Pakistani soldiers fighting side by side, and we could hold that up as an example of how our different communities could be cohesive.
Yes.
But following on from that, we knew very early on that one of the big kind of causes of tension between our communities, particularly South Asian communities, was partition and the creation of Pakistan and India. And when we spoke to young people, there was a real sense that, all that they really heard from the older people in their community was, we suffered more than the other side, but without really understanding the history.
Yeah.
So we did an oral history project on that, so that the young people could really understand partition and how those tensions developed, and really shed a light on it so that they could better understand it. Because one of the things about the past is that the more people have a shared understanding of it, the less likely it is to be manipulated by people who want to cause tensions between communities.
Yes, it sounds like a lot of the tensions and stuff that happens is formed in those early years, as you said, by grandfathers talking about that, and that goes right through to when they become teenagers.
Yeah, and tensions become almost acceptable, in the home, instead of being challenged. But we find that these kind of myths that we learn about each other, they cut across all communities. So, I mean, one of the things that we really enjoy doing is doing proactive cohesion work in primary schools, where we train up local teenagers to be peer leaders, and then take them into the primary schools in their local community and deliver workshops around cohesion. And we make it really fun. But what you get to see is that young people, really develop their thinking. So, but in a fun way. So, for example, one of the things that we do is we give all of the young people a potato. Yeah. And we say, look at your potato, get to know your potato better than anyone else's potato. And you see all of these, 7, 8-year-olds really looking at their potato. And then we take them all in, we shake up this bag, and then we get them to find their potato again. And then we get them to put their hands in front of their potato and say, what do we have in common with them? And what they figure out is that the potatoes are all different sizes, and we're all different sizes. And some of their potatoes have scars, and some of us have scars. And some of the potatoes are different colors, and we have different colors. And some of them have spots, and so on. But when we take a couple of the potatoes and chop them in half, inside we're all the same. And we use that as, as an analogy to talk about how, in our community, we're all different shapes and sizes. We're all different colors. Some of us have got spots and scars, but inside we're exactly the same.
That's marvellous. That's a marvellous analogy. And what type of age would the children or teenagers be when you work with them on that?
We find that year 4, year 5. You
Yeah.
can so around 7, 8,
Oh,
9.
right. Yeah. So quite young.
Those young people, we can make a real difference to how they see the world,
Yeah.
and the teenagers that we take in. Well, we take in young people as soon as they're at secondary school, so year 7, so that'd be around 11, 12 upwards.
Yes.
But one of the things that's really special as well, and I keep going back to how long we've been doing this, is that what I find is that I can be in Tesco, doing my weekly shop, and then I can bump into someone, and they'll say, "You came to my primary school, and you did this exercise with potatoes or stuff like that." And what's really amazing is that you find that even though the time that you spent with the young people was relatively short, that workshop that you did with them, it really spoke to them and stayed with them, and that can be really special.
Yeah. That's great. Just going back to how things have progressed. I mean, has anybody measured how tensions are now, say, compared with 10 or 15 years ago?
That's such a good question, because we don't have one of the things that I think we need, not just in Slough, but perhaps across the UK, is there's been different questionnaires used in the past to kind of understand the levels of tension within community, and how people feel around cohesion and things like that. But different when governments change, the measures change. So sometimes it's very hard to objectively say, that things have improved or got worse. And so then other proxies get used, like fear of crime. A lot of people say that how scared a community is of crime is a good way of measuring how cohesive it is, because normally if a community feels more apprehensive or scared, it points towards less cohesion. So unfortunately, because there's not many decent measures that are objective, it becomes a subjective exercise in terms
Yeah,
of,
I appreciate it is very subjective. You've got the fear of crime, and which isn't a crime itself, but it's a reaction to possible crime. Yourselves, I mean, are you as busy as ever? But I guess you're probably more busy on the proactive side now, are you?
yeah, I think a lot of it is in terms of when we try to make our communities, safer, more cohesive. We do youth work, and when we do youth work, what we find is that there's a lot of young people with high levels of need, and when you start supporting those young people, that again opens up more avenues of work. So, an example of that would be 2014, when we found that actually a lot of the young people that we were working with around cohesion and violence, a lot of them were caring for people in their lives. So we found that a lot of the young people had a relative with an illness, a disability, an addiction, and they just weren't getting the support that they needed. So we decided to start Slough Young Carers, and that's a big part of our work now. We've got young people from 5 years old up until 18 that we're supporting, who have a caring responsibility at home.
Yes.
And so things like that, where just the work grows and grows when you start to try and meet the needs of young people in the community.
There's a lot of different things that you're doing by the sound of it. With social media and the use of social media by teenagers, does that play much? What sort of impact does that have on their lives?
It has a huge impact. So in terms of, the work that we began, kind of addressing tensions in communities, social media can be really dangerous, because it can be used to really give an impression that something is happening that is completely false. And of course, any content that depicts violence or racism or some perceived persecution can be extremely persuasive. It can evoke really strong reactions. So that's something that's become more and more of an issue. And then, of course, tensions, when they do exist, they can be exacerbated so quickly via social media.
Yeah.
Anyone who's been working in education, with young people over the last 20 years, they will rue the dawn of social media because, and mobile phones in general, because, it used to be, for example, that, attention could exist in a school and, teachers would have a bit of time and space to sort it out, whereas now, like, attention can start to develop and people will be texting and WhatsApping cousins, friends, so that, before long at all, what was initially quite a low level conflict is spilling out and involving relatives, and it's escalating and
Yeah.
and all sorts. But I
So
mean,
that has become an additional challenge for you. I can see that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, also as well around mental health, because young people being influenced by people with views that are quite dangerous.
Yeah.
That's another issue. But also comparing their lives to one of the things that we do a lot of work on at the moment is mental health, and a lot of the young people that are that do have really poor mental health is caused by spending a lot of time online, comparing their lives to other people, being egged on to live a less healthy lifestyle by other people in similar situations. So, it can have a huge impact on the welfare of young people.
How is the charity funded, Rob?
It's funded in a range of ways. I think that's been a strength of the organisation in the sense that, sadly, a lot of other groups that we've known over the years that have been doing fantastic work, if they're over reliant on one source of funding and that funding ends, then it can lead to the end of a project. But we're really lucky in the sense that we have a range of ways of being supported. So sometimes members of the public are inspired what we do and donate. There's also grant making organisations that have supported us in the past. More recently, we've been really lucky that corporate organisations have valued what we do. So Coca-Cola, for example, are just funding us to take on an apprentice.
Wow.
So that's huge.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, the local authority will, say, oh, we need a piece of work doing, all of the NHS and commissioners to do that. So, a real broad range of ways, really, just to keep us going.
So if we've got any listeners listening who fancy donating in some way, we can put a link on the show notes, Rob.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you.
What's your relationship like with the various religious organisations in Slough?
It varies in the sense that I think one of the things that is brilliant about the diversity of our faiths is that for some of them, like the committee that kind of runs that faith organisation is very prominent and a first port of call. For other faiths, it's the actual faith leader, the priest or the imam or the Gyani who we might have a relationship with. Who we have the relationship with varies from place of worship to place of worship, but certainly we do have a good relationship with the different faith institutions. And one of the things that we love doing is exposing young people to those different faith buildings, because there's always such a mystique. They're always wondering what goes on, but behind those doors. One of the projects that I've really enjoyed in recent years is there was a youth group in Northern Ireland that became aware of our work. And one of the things that's happened in Northern Ireland is, as the tensions have receded between Catholics and Protestants to some extent, there's been much more of an interest in other communities.
Yes.
But Northern Ireland isn't hugely diverse itself. So we've started doing hosting groups of young people from Northern Ireland to kind of show them about, a diverse community on the mainland, and taking young people from Northern Ireland to meet young people in Slough from our diverse communities, and to visit the Gurdwara or visit the mosque, and to see the impact of those visits has been absolutely fantastic.
That was going to be one of my questions, actually, Rob, which was you've got the charity working in Slough. There, I guess there must be other. I mean, you've mentioned there in Northern Ireland, but there must be other towns and cities in the UK where you've got, a huge different diverse communities and there are tensions. Are there any charities that are similar to yours? And that was the first part of the question. The second part of the question was, do you talk to each other?
Yeah, I think sadly, I think there used to be more, but I think over the years, quite a few of them have fallen away. But certainly, we've reached out to different groups over the years and learned from each other. I think one of the things that's really interesting as well is just how important context is and being aware of that, because in certain parts of the UK. So, for example, when I went to where I was studying in Bradford, you know, some of the schools there are very much serving either a white British or a Kashmiri community, and there's maybe one or two big communities, whereas a Slough school that we work in might have, say, three young people from white British backgrounds, two Ghanaians, three Somalis, two Polish, really super diverse. And the approach that you take in those different contexts has to be completely different. Even our own work, we're occasionally called out to say work in a school in RBWM, the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. And we might leave, our context of super diversity to go 10 minutes down the road and be in a context where the classroom is 90% white British. And then how we approach conversations around diversity and cohesion have to be completely different. But we enjoy kind of learning about how to operate in those different contexts, and you can still make a massive difference in either, really, because
Yes.
there's always work to do.
Yeah, I can see how adaptable you have to be, and that must be very interesting for you. Just on the subject of the nitty gritty, so you've got, paint a picture. You've got two factions. You've been told that there's a problem between them. There's been a little bit of violence, a lot of stuff going on. Could you just describe very briefly how you would work with them? I mean, do you get them together? Do you have a talk with them? I mean, you mentioned about the potato, but I guess that's more on the proactive side. But 15-year-old group, two groups, 15, say 15, 16. Can you just paint a picture as to what you would do to work with them, please?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, seeking to understand the solution and kind of using different tools to sit down, but a lot of them is just about listening to each side of the story and things like that.
Would you get them in the same room together?
Rarely, and the reason why that would be is that often, especially when it comes to something that's identity based, it tends to be one group that can be very cohesive that might be targeting another group. So, for example, we had a group on the edge of Slough that was white British, and we'd been brought in because they'd been attacking Asian homes. The police couldn't prove precisely who it was within a certain group, and therefore, charges hadn't been filed, but they knew that it was this group of young people. So, in that respect, there was a lot of the conflicts that we have are quite asymmetrical in the sense that it's not two groups that are of equal size. It's a group that can be, almost terrorizing another.
Yeah.
So, in that context, it was a case of working with that specific group of white British young people about, why the level of ignorance sometimes, and the motivations can be huge. So I remember, this white British group was saying that, one of the reasons why they attacked the Asian homes was because they were going to build a mosque and they didn't want one on their street. But the house they actually attacked was owned by Sikhs, which gives you an indication of the mentality that and some of the myths that we're trying to address there.
And how did they react to that when you told them?
Not always well. I mean, one of the things that's one of the reasons why I think prevention is so much easier than cure is often when people build up a narrative of hate towards another community, it becomes part of who they are.
Yeah,
So many people define themselves not by who they actually are, but by who they're not. And
yeah,
so, once we start trying to, deconstructing some of the myths that they believe, actually, you're kind of deconstructing who they think they are, because, that they've built up this vision of, in their case, like a great white Britain where, the royal family isn't diverse, or that, fish and chips, they think, has been around since the time of, on English shores since the time of Jesus. And then you start to explain that, fried fish and chips was imported by Portuguese Jews and things like that. And it's not necessarily something that
yeah,
they want to hear, because it kind of conflicts with their vision. And I mean, I remember one of those boys that we worked with in that group was really passionate about, the British Army and the Second World War.
yeah,
And, that then dovetails really nicely with some of those other projects I've already mentioned around, looking at Indian servicemen, because he had a vision of a Second World War that was almost exclusively fought by the white British soldiers, whereas actually we were able to show him that that's a myth.
yeah. You've worked for the charity for 20 years. What in that time? What are you most proud of?
I think it's the human capital. Like I couldn't point to a piece of paper or some bricks and mortar and say, look, we did that, because it's not that kind of project. But every week, I'll receive an email that will just make me feel like, wow, we're on the right lines here and we've done the right thing. Sometimes it's a message from someone who has stumbled across us on social media and said, you came to my school and I just remember that it just had such a big impact on me. Thank you. Other times it can be a reference request from someone who's volunteered here, and I'm thinking, wow, they've used what they've learned here and what we've done as a springboard to as a career into being, a teacher, or working in community safety, or the police, or whatever it is, really. So seeing young people that we've worked with go on to do great things means a huge amount to us. And so I guess that's probably our biggest source of pride.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you derive a great deal of satisfaction from all that, which is fantastic, and I guess the team do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got I feel really proud of the team that we developed here. And, it's such a tight knit team. I mean, even to the extent that, it's a silly example, but every day, when it gets to around lunchtime, everyone eats together and catches up, and it
Yeah.
really feels like a little family.
And a sort of macro question, really, what can we as society do? Do you think? You've been involved with this now for 20 years. You've seen all sorts of issues, and you've resolved many of them. What do you feel as a wider society we can do, and what we should be aware of? So some of us could live in places like Bromsgrove or Windsor or Harpenden or somewhere where it tends to be fairly white, not much diversity. What do you? What's your message for listeners?
I think I think there's so much that we can do as a society for young people in general, and a lot of the issues that young people are facing are cut across all communities. So, I mean, the level of child poverty in the UK and the rate that it's increasing is really, really worrying, because not least because young people shouldn't be growing up in these environments, but it means that they're also more susceptible to all of those other challenges that we know. Once a young person, goes down a route of getting involved in gang activity, drugs, criminal exploitation, it can be so hard to bring those lives back on track, and prevention is so much better than cure. But what often makes a lot of these young people so susceptible is growing up in poverty. So what cuts across all communities is that we need to be a lot more supportive of young people. I think also as well, we need to, as a society, we need to get a grip on social media and
Yeah.
and the amount of negative influence young people are coming under online, because I think that's also having a huge impact on young people when we've got a mental health epidemic. We have to look at where that's coming from, and I think online influences is huge. When it comes to cohesion and our different communities, I think it's just, again, education is key, and just learning about our, different communities. Just to give you an example, I think one of the most pernicious and horrible kind of things, that I've heard labelled against young people from Pakistani community, for example, is being called dirty. Whereas if you learn a little bit about the community, that it's a predominantly Muslim community, and as part of the faith, you're encouraged to pray 5 times a day. But as part of that prayer process, there's something called wuzu, which means that you wash yourself so that you're ready to pray. So, you've got a community that might be a victim of a racial slur around being dirty, that actually washes themselves
Five
five
times a
times a
day.
day. So, actually just, giving young people the opportunity to learn about each other, I think is key. So I guess
Yeah.
if there was something for the wider community to do, it would be just to make those spaces and to encourage young people to learn about each other.
So poverty, social media, learning about each other, those are the three things which you if you had a magic wand, you'd wave it.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that I get called into a lot of schools and youth centres over, Bob, is a situation where there might be a group of white young people going, a group of Asian young people going, a group of black young people, and those different groups not interacting. And
Yeah.
actually, when you walk into those rooms, you can see that they're separate. When I speak to those young people and try and get a handle on what's going on, there's no there's no vicious vitriol between them. There's no real hatred, although in a situation where they're not mixing, it is easier to stir that up. But it doesn't necessarily need to be there. It can just be that they're not really mixing. And one of the things that I try to develop our practice, and one of the thinkers that's been quite influential in that respect is a guy called Thomas Schelling, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he used checkerboards to think about segregation between communities in America. And what he realized through maths was that we only need to want the people around us, 50% of them, to be the same as us, for eventually complete segregation to take place. And what the upshot of that was that it meant that what you need for an integrated community, for people to mix, is just for people to want to do it, for people to make an effort. So in those communities that we go into where people aren't mixing, the message has to be that we're not going to be a cohesive community through osmosis. It's not just going to happen naturally. You guys have to proactively try to get to know each other, to understand each other, to be friends, because it's not going to happen by chance.
No.
Because you're naturally going to gravitate sometimes towards people that you feel are more like you, that you're more comfortable with. So, all of us, we just need to make more of an effort.
How does sport come into that?
Sport is massive. So if I took you to the Chalvey area of Slough on a Wednesday evening, that's when we run our football session. Chalvey, just to give some of your listeners some context, is the area with the highest level of child poverty in Slough, and probably one of the highest areas of child poverty in the southeast. So a lot of young people living in very difficult circumstances. It's also hugely diverse. But if you come down to our football session, and the FA visited it recently, and they were just blown away. And one of the things that they highlighted was just how diverse that group of young people is.
Yeah.
But they're using football, that universal language, to come together. and that universal language is so important, because some of the boys that come there they don't speak English. Some of the boys are unaccompanied asylum seeking children that have been through all kinds of trauma. But when we put them on a pitch together with a ball, all you can see is them coming together,
Yeah,
unity,
commonality.
belonging. It's
Yeah.
huge.
What about music and art? I mean, have you got any initiatives with those?
Yeah. So it's interesting, because I think one of our key values as youth workers is listening to young people. And sometimes it means listening to them even when you don't necessarily think it's a great idea. And one example of that always comes to mind is our spoken word project, Empowered.
Okay.
A small group of young people came up to me one day. I think there was 3 or 4 of them, and they said, "We really want to do a spoken word poetry project." And I thought to myself, who is going to be interested in this though? Like, poetry, isn't that like, for much older people? Obviously there's 3 or 4 of you have found each other that want to do this, but I'm sure there's not a wider market for it. And I'm really pleased to say it's one of the wrongest things I've been about, while I've been at the organisation, because
Wow.
I mean, we asked the young people to name it, and they came up with a kind of pun. It's called Empowered, but spelled EMPOWORD,
Oh,
with the
right.
emphasis on the word.
Yeah.
But it's a spoken word poetry project, and it's hugely popular with the young people.
Is it sort of connected to rapping?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's great about it is, again, just the diversity of the way that you can express yourself through poetry. So some of the young people will rap, whereas some of the young people are much more kind of like classical poets. We found that if it's just kind of poetry and rap, it's it's nice to break it up sometimes with some musical performances, so that comes into it.
Yeah.
But what we found is that when young people were writing poetry or raps, they were really sharing their experiences with each other. So again, you've got an engine for cohesion in the community. But more broadly than that, what we found is that suddenly the number of people who were interested in getting involved was going up, and the age group was getting more and more wide. So what we started to say was that this was a poetry project. This was a project that was for the whole community, but powered by young people. And now I think our oldest performer is in his 70s.
That's
Brilliant chap.
fantastic stuff, Rob. It's really good. I mean, I can't believe. Well, I can believe, but I mean, the amount of different initiatives that you've got going, which is obviously being driven by you, but actually, it's the young people putting it together is absolutely fantastic. So, if we've got any listeners or anybody that we know or listener might know somebody who's thinking of coming in to be a youth worker, what advice would you give them?
Buckle up, because no, I would say I'm half joking really, but I think it is such a thrilling experience being a youth worker. The experiences that you can have working with young people. There's you can expect to spend a lot of time laughing, a lot of time crying or feeling like you want to cry, and everything in between. I mean, just working with young people in the community, you've got to open yourself up to all of the experiences that they're going through, and supporting them through that. And sometimes it can just, it can really just fill you with, so much happiness to see them thriving. But you also have, the counter side of that, the despair when things don't, go particularly well. I mean, just last night, a young person visited me for the first time after he's been, released from prison, and we're going to be trying to rebuild his life. But
Yeah.
just the despair I felt when he when he well got sent to prison. But now we go again and we rebuild. And I think I think doing youth work in all its various forms, it's such a wonderful, diverse field. Unfortunately, one of the things that is a challenge with it is that sometimes it's very hard to prove the impact of it, because, a lot of the time it's not an overnight success. And, some of the young people that we work with to get to a good place, it takes years, and obviously funding cycles and ways of measuring things, they're not built for years and the life's journey. I always think of that Lloyd's TSB slogan, for the journey, because I think, that's what youth work is. But, it does bring its challenges. So, I guess if I was talking to someone who was at the start of their career, I would say, congratulations, you've chosen a really exciting field to go into.
It sounds ever so worthwhile. And if we've got any listeners in the Slough area or just around about Slough, and they'd like to become involved with your charity, what should they do?
I think the first thing to do is reflect on what you want to bring to it. I think even beyond, Together as One, there's a huge number of organisations out there that are looking for support, and everyone's got something to give. And I think, so for example, if there's anyone out there that's great with numbers, they might be thinking to themselves, well, how could a youth work charity use my skills? But actually, we do a lot of work with young people around, transferable skills in IT and Excel, but also there's a lot of other groups we need support, balancing our books and things like that. So if you've got a skill set, I'm pretty sure that there's a group like ours that need it. So,
well, yeah, I was just thinking if somebody's got, say, a sales or a marketing background, perhaps they could get involved with fundraising.
Absolutely, or even just helping the groups to spread their word, around what they're doing and raise awareness. Because some of the groups are very, very savvy around social media, for example, whereas some of the others, they're incredible at doing that work face to face with vulnerable communities, but not so good at promoting it. So lots of different needs out there.
Yeah, well, it's been a great conversation. We've obviously spoken a lot about what you're doing for society and the local community. What do you do in your spare time to unwind? You must be like a wound up spring at the end of the day.
You're absolutely right, Bob. There's a lot. I mean, one of the things that I really enjoy doing is getting into nature. And it's funny when people hear that you live in Slough, they don't necessarily think that you'll be very close to it, but I live in the Britwell area, which has got Bluebell Woods and Burnham Beaches on its doorstep. So I like to go walking up there. And I'm also very keen on keeping chickens. So I've got some of those that are very relaxing. And also for my sins, I'm an avid Aston Villa fan. So
right. Yeah.
I do follow the Villa as well as a way of relaxing.
We better leave it there with football, haven't we?
Yeah.
This has been a really interesting conversation, Rob. I mean, I found it particularly it's opened my mind, shall we say, and I'm sure it will have done for listeners. It's been inspirational with some of the stuff that you're doing. My guest today has been Rob Deeks. He's the CEO of Together as One, which is a youth-led charity bringing communities together as one through training, youth work, and creative projects, and a link of which can be found on the show notes. Thank you for coming on the show, Rob.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.